Did its part in World War II. Coast Guard officers and men fought and served in every theater of operations. Meeting the challenge of total war, they performed duties entirely new to the service and performed them well. On many distant enemy shores, Coast Guard beachmasters unloaded urgently needed supplies. In the Persian Gulf, picket boats patrolled forts filled with Lend-Lease weapons for Russia. On newly captured Japanese islands, Coast Guard dog patrols routed out hidden enemy snipers. In the invasion waters off Normandy, 83-footers saved over 1,000 lives. In harbors seized from the enemy, buoy tenders prepared the way for Allied shipping. In the North Atlantic, Coast Guard manned vessels reported weather conditions for the guidance of shipping and transoceanic air traffic. Based on Guam, Coast Guard liberators carried high-priority cargo to outlying Lorraine stations. But the main job of the service was to man the thousands of Navy, Army, and Coast Guard ships in a war in which every battlefront was thousands of miles from America. Over 80,000 Coast Guard officers and men, more than 6 times the entire peacetime strength of the service, were assigned to over 4,000 vessels of all sizes, ranging from small boats to ocean liners. Large Navy transports manned by Coast Guardsmen ferried great masses of troops across the ocean to return to the United States with prisoners, wounded, and veterans. They manned assault transports, whose landing craft carried soldiers and Marines directly to enemy shores. Coast Guard personnel were assigned to combat cargo ships, bringing supplies and munitions to invasion beachheads. With hundreds of Army freight supply ships, Coast Guardsmen operated an all-important inter-island shipping service in the Pacific. From Sicily to Okinawa, the service manned LSTs, the naval innovation of World War II that revolutionized amphibious warfare. LCIs, landing craft infantry, spearheaded invasions in both the European and Pacific theaters. Even before America's entry into the war, Coast Guard ships and men were in it. Early in 1940, when the war in Europe forced all vessels to maintain radio silence, Coast Guard cutters on patrol duty in the North Atlantic were designated to supply meteorological data for ships and aircraft. Stationed in strategic positions, Coast Guardsmen were able to report German activities and save many survivors of torpedoed Allied vessels. When, in April 1940, Germany invaded Denmark, the danger of a Nazi occupation of Greenland, Denmark's strategically located colony in the Western Hemisphere, became a serious threat, not only to Atlantic shipping, but also to the North American continent. To maintain our neutrality, several cutters were dispatched to patrol Greenland waters. And the service was charged with advising and assisting the Danish authorities in establishing effective defense measures. Representing the United States, the first American consular officials were brought to Greenland by the Coast Guard. Urgently needed food and medical supplies were delivered to the native population, which had depended completely on its imports from Denmark. But of immediate importance was the safeguarding of the world's only known commercial deposit of cryolite, indispensable in the production of aluminum. To protect this mine against sabotage, a number of experienced Coast Guard enlisted men were released from the service to volunteer to work as mine guards for the Greenland government. A thorough topographical survey of the island was made by service personnel. The new charts proved of immeasurable value in navigating the treacherous Greenland waters and in the establishment of air, naval, and weather stations. In strategic places, 3-inch guns were installed by Coast Guardsmen to safeguard vulnerable harbor entrances. As Greenland is the best source of prediction for Europe's weather, radio stations were planted there by Nazis and Quislings. Service personnel captured the hidden stations to prevent the broadcasting of weather information to the enemy. As late as December 1944, the Coast Guard was still fighting enemy attempts of infiltration into Greenland.
With Uncle Sam's Arctic Patrol only a few hundred miles from the North Pole, searching for Nazi weather stations along Greenland's iceberg-guarded shores with a task force of Coast Guard cutters. The cutter Northland wedged in dangerous pack ice. Coast Guardsmen skid a depth bomb forward to smash the way. No time to lose. Scout planes report an armed German trawler ahead, so they lower away and blast the path to battle. Off Shannon Island, the Nazi trawler is sighted and American guns cut loose. Meanwhile, from the cutter Storis, a landing party sets out for Shannon Island to capture the Nazi shore station, well fortified and hidden in the ice fields. Risky hunting for the Coast Guardsmen. Twice before, in 2 months, has this weather-beaten crew ferreted out just such enemy installations. Now they're closing in on number 3, an icy cave camouflaged by snow. In the gathering Arctic darkness, the Germans surrender. 4th Nazi outpost in Greenland captured within a year, plus high-powered radio equipment, weather instruments, food, and ammunition. Back to the Coast Guard task force come small boats loaded with the crew of the captured German trawler. First aboard is the Nazi skipper, his men replaced on the German ship by an American prize crew after a battle fought farther north than any on record. Captives of the U.S. Coast Guard, which gets lots of the dirty work and little of the glory.
The experience of the Greenland Patrol was put to good use when the service was called upon to convoy merchant ships in the Atlantic. Scarcely more than a month after Pearl Harbor, the first Nazi submarine struck in American coastal waters, and the real wartime job of the Coast Guard began. Every available vessel was thrown into the fight, which threatened not only America's essential coastal shipping, but also the vital supply lines to our allies. Some cutters took their stations to guard the outer approaches to our coastal waters. Others escorted American and Allied merchant ships across the ocean. It was a Coast Guard cutter that was credited with sinking the first Nazi submarine in American waters.